Hi everyone, Rose here. In this video, we're going to look at a man you've probably never heard of, Johannes Greber. He was a former Catholic priest and a spiritist. Yet, his personal Bible translation was used and quoted in Watchtower publications to support key verses in the New World Translation. How could this happen? And why did the organization reference him for nearly 3 decades, even though they knew exactly who he was? Let's find out. Before we dive in, let's define what a spiritist actually is. According to the American Heritage Dictionary, a spiritist is one who claims to communicate with the dead. Now that's important to remember, because the Watchtower has repeatedly condemned any connection to Spiritism, calling it communication with Satan's world. Now keep that in mind as we move forward. In previous videos, we've talked about how Nathan Knorr instituted the ban on blood transfusions. He also established the disfellowshipping arrangement as we know it today. The date for Jerusalem's destruction was shifted from 606 BCE to 607 BCE without changing 1914 at all, and how 607 BCE isn't historically accurate. Now, we're adding another piece to the puzzle, a man named Johannes Greber, and how his Bible translation became tied to Jehovah's Witness doctrines. Johannes Greber was a German Catholic priest in the early 1900s. His wife was a self-proclaimed medium. In 1923, he attended a séance that changed his life. Afterward, he renounced his vows and left the Catholic Church. He said the spirits guided him to translate the New Testament correctly. His translation was called The New Testament, a new translation and explanation based on the oldest manuscripts. Greber claimed that the apostles didn't write under divine inspiration, except for the book of Revelation, which he said was given by an angel. Greber believed Jesus never intended for his teachings to be written down at all. When passages were unclear, Greber said his wife, acting as a medium, received the correct meaning from God's spirit messengers. Sometimes he claimed words would literally appear before his eyes as glowing letters. He wrote that if no manuscript matched what the spirits told him, he would simply record the version given by the spirits. In other words, his Bible was a spiritistic translation. Now, you would think a spiritist like that would be the last person the Watchtower would ever quote, right? Well, Greber first appears in the October 1st, 1955 Watchtower. That study article, Survival After Death, Part 3, defined a spiritist as someone who receives information through the power of Satan, the devil. Just a few pages later, that same magazine names Johannes Greber as a spiritist who wrote the book Communication with the Spirit World, Its Laws and Its Purposes. So they clearly knew who he was. But only a few months later, in the February 15th, 1956 Watchtower, on page 110, Greber is mentioned again, this time quoting from his Bible translation. It describes how he began communicating with God's spirit world and used those spirits to produce his translation. Despite calling him a spiritist, the Watchtower went on to reference his work again and again without warning readers about his methods. Even Fred Franz, who was viewed as the organization's biblical scholar and one of the governing body members, reportedly mentioned Greber's Bible in his talks, describing its look and feel. Now that's surprising when you remember that Franz's own Greek education was extremely limited. Still, the organization leaned on Greber's translation to reinforce certain verses, especially John 1:1 and Matthew 27:52 through 53. So let's start with John 1:1. The New World Translation reads, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God." But if you look at the Greek interlinear, published by the organization itself in 1969, the text says, "In beginning was the Word, and the Word was toward the God, and God was the Word." There's no A in Greek. Yet, in the September 15, 1962 Watchtower on page 554, the organization quotes Johannes Greber's translation to support the phrase, "and the Word was a God." They even note that his Bible had a gold cross on the cover, but failed to mention that it was a Spiritist's Bible. The Aid to Bible Understanding later cited his translation as well, alongside others like the Emphatic Diaglott. Out of all possible scholarly sources, the organization chose to quote the one created by a man who received his verses through the dead. Now, let's look at another example. Matthew 27:52 through 53. This passage describes tombs opening and bodies being raised after Jesus' death. It's one of the hardest passages in the New Testament to translate accurately. Even the January 1st, 1961 Watchtower admitted the verses were vague and difficult. But instead of leaving room for interpretation, the article said, "A modern German translation reads quite similarly," and then referenced Johannes Greber's translation again. The Watchtower used Greber's Bible to confirm how those verses should be read. Greber's version said the tombs were opened and the bodies were tossed upright and seen by many, almost identical to how the New World Translation rendered it. The Aid to Bible Understanding and later 1975 through 1976 Watchtowers continued referencing his translation, even comparing it to events reported in Time magazine about earthquakes opening graves. So for decades, the organization leaned on the same Spiritist translation to validate their interpretation. Then, in the April 1st, 1983 Watchtower on page 31, a reader asked, "Why has the Watchtower not made use of the translation by Johannes Greber in recent years?" Their answer? Because of his connection with Spiritism. And that was the end of it. No apology, no explanation for why he'd been quoted since 1955, almost 30 years earlier. Even though they knew all along he was a self-proclaimed medium. They only stopped referencing him when others started to notice. But the Bible itself says at Leviticus 19:31, "Do not turn to mediums or consult spiritists. You will become unclean by them." Yet, that's exactly what the organization did when it relied on Johannes Greber's translation to support its doctrines. Even respected Greek scholar Dr. J.R. Manty, who was quoted by the Watchtower to defend their translation, later said, "I've never seen any so-called translation that departs so far from what Scripture actually says as the New World Translation." He called it a shocking mistranslation, biased and deceptive, and he specifically noted that the organization had turned to the occult, referencing the Greber Bible to support their altered scriptures.
Dr. J.R. Manty, an eminent Greek scholar, was one of the authorities quoted out of context. The Watchtower Society has implied that he supports their New World Translation. Dr. Manty disagrees.
I have never found any so-called translation that goes so far away from what the Scripture actually teaches as these books published by Jehovah's Witnesses. They are so far away from what there is in the original Hebrew and the original Greek. You can't follow theirs because it's biased and it's deceptive, because they deliberately changed words in a passage of Scripture to make it fit into their doctrine. They distorted the Scripture in many passages, scores and scores of passages in the New Testament, dealing with the deity of Christ especially.
All of this shows how important it is to look beyond what the organization tells us. The details hidden in old publications, the footnotes, the references, the retractions, reveal a pattern of justifying doctrine at any cost. The truth shouldn't need to borrow from a Spiritist Bible to stand on its own. That's why learning the complete history matters, not just what's printed in new magazines or publications, but everything that came before that. Now, if this helped you see something new, please make sure to like and subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. And always, please keep searching. Well, that's it for this time. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like. And if you really enjoyed it, please subscribe so you can be notified of future videos. And it also helps the algorithms. As always, take care, everyone. You stay strong, and you do not let those men in Warwick win. Thank you for watching.